I always want to be out. Good afternoon or morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. We greatly appreciate your attendance, and it was a beautiful day to drive to Northwest Indiana. We usually meet in Indianapolis, so this is a special treat for us. So thank you for the hospitality. And so I just called this to order. And did we have meeting minutes from the last meeting that we want to approve? In our committee, Tony moves to approve. Sarah seconds. All in favor? Aye. No, that was unanimous. We don't have anybody calling in. This is it. This machine here is more necessary. My name is Dan Elsner. I served on the State Board of Ed for close to 10 years. I'll have to mark that out one of these days and do for certain. And two colleagues here, Sarah O'Brien, Tony Walker, who most of you probably know, you're well known in these parts, I suspect. And we serve on the State Board, and we were asked to be part of a task force to look at school turnaround efforts in Indiana. Before we start, I did this. We had one meeting in Indianapolis, one here, and then we'll have one in Evansville. And then by the end of October, thereabouts, I have the title in here, October, November, we'll have recommendations for the State Board and possibly the legislature on this issue, and certainly the turnaround circumstances that we have underway at this time. Before we begin, I'd give a little history and context to what we're doing. We're going to look at successes and challenges of turnaround. And we're going to look at not only in the short term, the schools we're working with now to advance learning for those young people, but also long term. What is it in the laws and regulations and approaches we've taken to this issue that should be reconsidered? We'll not only take input here and in these other two cities I mentioned and from others around the state, we also will be consulting national experts. You won't be surprised to know that when there's chronically challenged and failing schools around the country, other states have addressed this need to do some kind of an intervention. And so there's been some learning around the country and research and some expertise that we're going to tap into. Everybody Green, I didn't introduce you, who's our key staff of the board and a leader with the governor's efforts in education and career development. We're bringing expertise to say, what are people learning about these situations? And we'll bring those recommendations back to the State Board and certainly pass them on to the legislature. I was on the board a little bit before Tony, but we've actually lived through the discernment. We had 20-some schools that were under statute, not only eligible, but in need of intervention. And through a lot of expenditures of resources and time and consultants, many of those 22 schools got off the takeover or turnaround list. In other words, they made some big time moves, strong leadership, courageous leadership, and figured out a way to turn the tide in school performance, culture, attendance, all the things we look at. And so that was a big accomplishment. And frankly, as a state board and going through it, we not only prefer it, it's very much a principle and inherent in American education, and certainly among Hoosiers, local control. We believe in subsidiarity, that control, govern, and lead schools closest to the people you serve, not from the state level. That would be the priority. The countervailing part of that is the moral obligation to assure every child, regardless of zip code, background, receives a safe and at least reasonably good education. There should be indicators that that child has a future and that community has a future. And if there's continuous evidence that the schools are not serving the students well, and that they indeed are being, in a sense, robbed of their future, there has to be, even after all the efforts, we never really accused or tried to allude that folks hadn't tried hard, that they weren't able to turn it around, and a whole new approach and a new set of rules and arrangements by the adults needed to be intervened. And so we went through some serious discernments and reviews and hired consultants. And at the end of the day, there were some schools that we decided the state needs to work on. And so that's why we're here, and we're going to, one of course here is in your community, and we're going to listen to the pros and cons and what you've learned. Also, in addition to the obligation and the moral obligation and the principle of subsidiarity, I think it's very important that we put this in the right context in terms of many things in education get politicized. Our moral obligation to each student should not be politicized. And it's good to have a little historical context. We did a little research. In 1999, dear Governor Frank O'Bannon, one of the greatest gentlemen that ever served our state, actually signed into law a law that was presented and offered by Greg Ford. It passed the House 93-1 and the Senate 50-0. That's hard to find in the political process, that kind of unanimity. We'd like to find it more often. The whole school improvement and turnaround law, the statute that we're working on. Because the legislature obviously understood the moral obligation that if a school is chronically failing and we know the children in that school, their future is basically being taken away and that community's future should be taken away, something had to happen. And so they gave the state board the authority under certain guidelines of that they could intervene and should intervene, frankly. So through this process, we, you learn. The nation's learning what to do when you need to intervene. And we're going to learn from what's happened around the country. We're going to learn from you. We're going to learn from the other communities we've been in. Our first meeting was quite frankly insightful. And people were genuinely, how do we do this better? And I really saw a focus on the children and the future of communities. And I'm sure we'll find the same thing here today. And we'll can continue to agree that when it comes to each child, because each child in the state has inestimable worth, and we need to treat it that way. And so we'll come at this with our eyes wide open, our hearts with compassion for everybody involved, and we'll use the best discernments we can to plot a course forward where if we have to intervene, under what conditions, how will we do it best, how we spend the money best, how we get the best results, and how do we move forward so every school works for every child in the state of Indiana. So, with all those remarks and context said, I want to again thank you for being here. The first thing on the agenda is public comment. Looking at the size of the crowd, we usually try to keep public comments about 3 minutes. You have unlimited opportunities to share with the State Board of Ed. We're very open. We know how to receive input. We'll be glad to have your input, written testimony. Claire Fitting Green will be the official timer. Is that correct? Or someone will?
Sure, happy to do that.
Yeah. So we want your public comment. If you can keep it to 3 minutes, if you say, hey, I have a lot more to say, there's other ways to do that. We'll receive your input and make sure it's in the record and consider it as we develop recommendations and options for going forward in the near term and long term. And so at this time, I open it up to.
Do you want me to also go over the slides?
Oh, you were going to do that, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just very briefly.
I'm very sorry, Claire. I forgot that. We did this last time, and this is very helpful. And Claire Fitting Green has some more particulars that might be very helpful in context and direction here. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Just as we come into each community, we think it's helpful for the partners that we're going to hear from to provide some of the background and context on turnaround efforts in Indiana. There are some new players here that weren't involved a number of years ago, so to just build upon what Dan provided in terms of some of the history, we wanted to provide the state and federal context, as well as the activities that preceded the intervention of this school and the other turnaround academies in Indianapolis, and then provide a brief overview of all of the existing turnaround academies. So as Dan mentioned earlier, the framework for school turnaround activities started with Public Law 221, enacted in 1999, which, among other things, required the State Board of Ed to place every school in Indiana in a performance category. And those used to go by names: Academic Progress, Academic Watch. Then in 2011, the board actually, through rulemaking, changed the category names to grade letter names, but it was still the same way of calculating those categories, which was used to determine the placement of Roosevelt as a turnaround academy. And then, as you're all aware, the 8th rep rules changed in 2012 and were used for the 11 to 12 academic year. In 2013, state law actually was amended to put those 8th rep categories in state law. Now, again, under Public Law 221, enacted in 1999, the board is required to take a series of actions when a school has been placed in that bottom category for 6 years consecutively. The board has a number of options. It can look at merging the school with a nearby school. It can assign a special management team to operate all or part of the school. It can accept the Indiana Department of Education's recommendation for approving the school, and it can look at other options that it might hear through the public hearing process. A public hearing is required in each school, and then the board is required to implement some sort of intervention based on all of that information. The statutory definition of a turnaround academy is any school in which the State Board of Ed has intervened, and in Indiana we've put those into 2 different categories, but technically under law they're all turnaround academies. They're the turnaround school operators, which includes Roosevelt, and then there are what we call the lead partner model. Those are all together the turnaround academies. Our waiver from No Child Left Behind that was just renewed by the U.S. Department of Education, Indiana was among the first cohort of states to receive a waiver, and within that we have an entire section talking about how we provide support to our struggling schools and students and educators. And in our waiver we made a commitment that for a turnaround academy to rejoin the LEA, the State Board of Ed would need to see that the LEA in its entirety had really taken steps systemically to address what had led to that individual school being under State Board of Ed intervention. So I wanted to make sure you're aware of that federal context. In addition, this last legislative session in 2014, the law was amended to provide clear exit options for the schools that had come under State Board of Ed intervention. Not later than December 31st of the 5th year of intervention, the board can either return the school to a corporation, it can direct a special management team operating the school to apply to an authorizer to become a charter school, and it can also implement another intervention under the existing language that was already in law. So briefly about the activities that preceded the turnaround here in the area, as well as the 4 schools in Indianapolis that are the turnaround school operator model, as well as the lead partner models. There was a long series of effort. The Department of Education and State Board of Education consulted with Cambridge Education, which came in and conducted the year 4 school quality reviews, and then the Department of Education staff monitored the progress of those schools based on the recommendations from Cambridge. There were multiple community conversations. This is with the school, the building principals, but as well as district personnel. Then for those schools in year 5, as Dan mentioned earlier, there were actually 23 schools on track to be in that 6th consecutive year as an F, but through heroic efforts there, we had 16 of those schools actually moved up the performance category, but there were 7 schools that still remained in that bottom category, therefore triggering the requirement for the State Board of Ed to take some action. So there was the 1 school here, and then there were 6 schools at the Indianapolis Public Schools District. So the State Board of Ed did hold public hearings, and then during the hearings, the school performance data was presented. There was a presentation from the district. Community members provided testimony, and then the department issued a request for proposals for management companies who then presented to the department and the board how they might help improve the situation at those schools. And so the board then did act to assign an operator to completely manage 5 schools, Theodore Roosevelt Community High School, and then 4 schools at IPS. And then in addition, 2 other schools at IPS were assigned lead partners. In fall of 2012, there was another school at IPS that was assigned a lead partner, and then this past winter, there's a school in Evansville that also was put in the lead partner category. So the State Board of Ed and Department of Education staff held public hearings this past summer in Gary and in Evansville for 4 potential schools that are on track for possible State Board of Ed intervention. And we're starting to see these concentrations of schools in 3 districts. It's Evansville, Vanderbilt School Corporation, Gary, and IPS.
Thank you, Claire. I appreciate Claire's presentation. It does give you some of the steps we've taken, and now open for the public comment. And so, do we have a roster of what order there? Just people come forward as.
Yeah, so far no one has approached me or signed up. Is anyone here interested in providing public comment?
Be open to. Yes, sir.
Morning. My name is Mario Buzz. I'm the representative from the WACP and.
Did we get your name,
Would you
sir?
like to go to the mic, please?
Thank you, sir.
We want to make sure we have it on record who spoke.
Morning. My name is Robert Buzz. I'm on the Education Committee with the Urban League and the WACP. And I want to ask a question that's been prevalent in this area for some time. Maybe you all can clarify. Is it true when the parents have an option for their children to go to a charter school and the state allows X amount of money, and then once that child is taken out of the public schools, what we call, and then when it comes time for the allocation for the state to give to the public schools, they use the excuse that the attendance on enrollment is low, therefore they give them less money. Now, this has been a question we've been asking over and over and over again and cannot get a clear answer. In other words, if the student leaves A and goes to charter school B with the money, I think it's $8,500 or something, and then when the public school gets ready for their allotment, the state will say, well, your enrollment is down, naturally it's down because you offered an incentive for them to go to this school, then they get less money. Now, it also creates a problem because you don't have enough enrollment, then this school has to be closed because you don't have enough students to sustain and keep it open. Now, if for some reason then that charter school, we just student out, they come back into the public school system, so to speak. I know both of them are public schools. Then it creates a problem. Now, you close the school, the money stays where it is, and someone asked me, it looks like the state is sort of a part of this situation by enticing somebody by free choice to go here and taking some money here and then denying the public school their normal allocation. So that's been a question we've been asking for days and days and years, and I haven't got a chance yet.
I mean, I can start. The concept that the parent knows best where their child should be educated has been a premise, especially the last 5 or 6 years, that we've advanced in our state. That would be among public schools. There's a lot of choice in Indiana now among public schools, and among traditional public schools and public charter schools, and now there's even voucher options. So there has been through law and statute, the idea that if you think your child can be better served in another school, then they can go there, and that the state allocation should follow them to the people who are educating. So that is, in fact, been a policy trend in law. Probably the last 7 or 8 years in Indiana, it's slowly moved along. The charter school legislation is probably 10 years old.
2001.
2001. So it's actually, time goes fast. And the vouchers are a little newer. There's probably approximately 30,000 children use vouchers now. And I don't know the total number in charter schools, but it's advancing. There's been a lot of innovative, creative schools. So the fact of the matter is, parents have a lot of more power and authority over where their child will be educated. And the logic is where that child's educated, the people who educate them should get the money, should follow the child.
And if that child comes back, and that charter school teaches them that for make them up and put them out, what's the option? They have to go back to the public school system, but the money stays at the charter school, right?
The money
So the
follows,
money go back to the state.
money follows the child.
They follow the child from the charter school back to the public school. The application is made for the public school from the state. Is it before the parent make the decision to take their child afterwards? In other words, if the public school was to get allocated money for the students, does it come before that mother takes their child out of the school? How do you determine who goes what, where, when? In other words, if you give a parent the choice to take their children someplace else, do you simultaneously provide allocation for the public school at the same time?
Let me respond a little bit. Mr. Phillips, you're raising a very important issue because this also came up as it affected the turnaround. Generally, there's a count date. So there's a lag of time between the funds actually following the child. If the child is actually at the charter school on the count date, there's a time period before that money ends up back in a traditional school with the child, in fact, leaves them after a month, like your scenario. We have the same situation with turnaround as to when do you count. And one of the things that we did at the outset was to add in a second reconciliation date where we said, okay, we think there are going to be this many students when we start out, but just in case, we don't want to wait that whole year for the lag. So we added in a second date to make sure, as close as possible, that when turnaround started, that the turnaround operators were only getting money for kids that were actually in school.
Thank you. And one other question that NAACP, we have been asked to investigate. When the turnaround school, when the state quote unquote takes over a school as a turnaround school, the physical maintenance of that school still remains with the school city corporation. Why is that?
The law was just written that way. None of us had anything to do with it. The General Assembly, when we put it together, that's the way it's written.
Like, if you take over my house, kick me out, but I'm going to keep the maintenance up for you, so to speak.
Personally, that's one of the things I'm interested in this process that personally I feel needs to be looked at.
But the money does come back from the charter school, they go back to the public schools.
Correct.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
And same return.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Any other public comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, then we could go to a presentation by Garrett Community Turnaround School Operator Edison. And we're going to ask him to review successes, transition challenges, and operating challenges. Please.
Good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I would like to thank the board members who spent part of their morning with us. I hope that you enjoyed the tour. Thank you for visiting Roosevelt. My name is Donna Henry, principal of Theodore Roosevelt College and Career Academy. Our vision at Theodore Roosevelt is that every student will be proficient and prepared for college and careers. Our mission is to maximize each student's potential, create a sense of urgency for students to reach proficiency, as well as for each student to have the opportunity to learn at high levels. In the beginning, Edison Learning conducted a collaborative quality analysis using a rubric based on the 52 features of an outstanding school. These features are tied to 5 Edison learning strands Each strand focuses on a reflective question around the areas of leadership, learning environment, assessment for learning, pedagogy and curriculum, and student and family support. The 52 features are used throughout the school year to monitor the school's process and also to develop a school improvement plan. In May 2012, Edison Learning facilitated a comprehensive survey in which it was found that the grounds were not properly maintained, learning spaces were disorganized, the heating and cooling system were not functioning properly, and the lockers were severely damaged. Along with the operational challenges, systemic challenges that were experienced range from school security and safety and low attendance rates. Academically, we discovered that 75% of the students were far below grade level when it came to reading. In congruence with research, there's a strong correlation between students' literacy attainment and their performance outcomes on standardized tests. Upon gaining access to the building and retrieving records, we discovered inaccurate transcripts and inefficient materials that were not used throughout the building. But in 2012, there was a shift. There were numerous renovations completed throughout the building. In alignment with the Edison Learning design, learning spaces were updated, as well as the hallways and other shared spaces throughout the building. The development of the school safety plan and the discipline plans were essential to the turnaround process. The plans and interventions such as the VIP program or very important PANTH program have positively impacted the school. The school day was redesigned to include daily professional development, which everyone who joined us on the tour, they were able to witness today. Two major factors that have allowed the school to sustain success are the Edison Learning 8 core values and the five-strand design. Each year, during the first 8 days of school, the students learn about wisdom, justice, courage, compassion, respect, responsibility, and integrity. And for the duration of the school year, one core value is the focus for each month. And so students are able to learn more in depth about the core value, as well as exhibit the characteristics of the core value and be rewarded for that as well. In this particular diagram, the 8 core values encase the 5-strand design. Once again, pedagogy and curriculum, student and family support, learning environment, assessment for learning, and leadership. And this is because this is the foundation of all that we do. And all of these are important to actually raising student achievement and improving teacher performance. Each of the strands are related to one of the 7 turnaround principles, the first being leadership. At Theodore Roosevelt, we have a distributed leadership model. Additionally, we utilize the Edison Learning framework for learning and teaching, which is not only in the guidance tool, but leads to the coaching as well. Turnaround principle 2 focuses on instructional practices. Teachers receive feedback from administration almost daily, and we have a co-teaching model so that the students who have special needs, they are supported within the classroom. Learning coaches meet with small groups of students daily to set and review goals set at the beginning of the year. And these goals are around academic achievement as well as the core modes of learning. All incoming 9th grade students, they participate in the 2-week program, which they is designed to really help them be successful in their high school, their 4 years of high school. For students with severe credit deficiency, we have implemented an e-recovery program so that they are able to recover credits throughout the school day. To address student needs as indicated in Principle 4, we have a school-wide literacy focus, math and reading interventions, as well as an alternative education program for students who exhibit difficulties in the traditional setting. Advanced students have access to courses through our blended learning program. Data drives not only the instruction, but it provides the administration with feedback on what exactly it is that the teachers need in regards to professional development. Achievement teams meet weekly to make instructional decisions, and they meet around academic data, behavior data, and attendance data as well. Once again, the 8 core values, they are the basis of everything that we do. Teachers and students, they review the behavior matrix and really work together in order to develop a common language about the behavioral expectations throughout the school. Families and communities, they are essential to the turnaround work. Monthly, we host a parent night to keep the parents abreast of all things Roosevelt. And additionally, we have developed some fruitful partnerships throughout the community with different organizations despite the earlier challenges that we experienced. All of the aforementioned topics have allowed students to move towards proficiency, as indicated in this diagram, which is data from our reading sprinter, which is administered on a quarterly basis. Through the reading interventions, our students have demonstrated a mean lexile growth of 79.9 points. Ultimately, the changes have been successful in several areas and have really set the stage for success. In 2014, the graduation rate was 54%, and 77% of graduates enrolled in a 2 or 4-year college. Our attendance goal, as stated in our contract, is 92%. We ended the 2014 school year at 81%. Discipline was a huge area that needed our focus, and with all of the work that we put in, we saw a 54% decrease in discipline referrals. Since 2012, we've seen a 9.9 gain in the overall ISTEP Plus pass rate in comparison to the 1.6 gain by one of the other turnaround operators in the States. The area of improvement is definitely the high school performance, and although the progress has been slow, for the 2014 school year, the math Algebra 1 ECA pass rate tripled over the previous year. Operations and facilities are definitely moving in a more positive direction. However, a few challenges still remain. Our site operation manager, she handles all facility and operation issues. Currently, there is a maintenance agreement between Edison Learning and the school corporation. Edison Learning up to this date has invested a significant amount of funding to improve the conditions of the building. One of the greatest challenges has still been the actual facility. The heating and cooling system has been in our school, the pool, stadium, and track. They are still in need of repair. Funding presents its own set of challenges in the realm of enrollment and also the school improvement grant. The process to actually apply for the school improvement funds has often been cumbersome and untimely. Overall, achievement is not an option at Theodore Roosevelt because it is what we do on a daily basis. When a family makes a decision to become a part of the Theodore Roosevelt family, it's because they do so with the expectation that their child will achieve and that their child will succeed. Everyone from the school team to the Edison Learning support team, we are all committed to the success of our students. Thank you for your time.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. An important piece, obviously, of what you guys are doing is dealing with the attendance problem.
Yes.
In 2012, essentially you're saying a third of the kids were not attending.
Yes.
What are you doing in that regard? And I know one effort has been around truancy. And what type of feedback are you getting from the parents as relates to your truancy area?
Definitely. In year one, we did not have a full-time truancy officer. But after that first year, we sat down and reflected, and that was definitely a need. So number one, the first thing was to do was to hire someone who can dedicate the time to tracking those students down and getting in touch with those parents. The truancy officer, we actually have a process. When students have missed 3 consecutive days of school, our learning coaches, because they work with small groups, our learning coaches make that call home to see if there's a sickness, there has been a death in the family, is there a reason behind that? If not, they're moved into tier 2, and then that's when our truancy officer will step in. Last year, our first year with the truancy program, 73 truancy referrals was taken to the actual Gary Police Department and went through the court system. That was a dramatic increase last year to 32 actual referrals. Parents, depending on the age, because right now the focus in the city has really been among 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. The bulk of what we see comes from the 18, 19-year-olds in the building because there's no accountability. The feedback from the parent has been they are grown. However, they are still in school and of school age at this point since they're attending school, and so there has to be some accountability. Some parents believe that the charge of parental neglect is quite harsh. However, it is their responsibility to make sure that the students attend school. And so to help open up and get the parents involved and provide them support, we host parent meetings in which parents can work with one another and support one another on challenges. They may be experiencing a child who has been quite boastful as of lately, and so they can work with another parent who's experiencing the same thing. So providing opportunities for parents to work together and the school team seeking out supports for them as well.
Has the prosecutor's office actually been prosecuting your referrals?
Yes.
Or are they?
Yes.
Something there?
Yes. They either have to go to truancy classes, which are 16 truancy classes. They are fined. They can actually receive jail time. We've had parents who refuse to pay the money and they don't want to go to tourism classes, and they opt to say, you know what, take me away, and that's just what it is.
Do you think that's making a difference in your numbers, or are there other things going on as well?
Definitely. I found that when you inconvenience the parents, they will step up and say, when you get off the bus, you go into the school building, and they will follow up with their children. It's a very small percentage of parents who actually go through the long, entire process for the children's needs. But the parents, for the most part, they try their hardest, but there's a small percentage of parents who continue to struggle.
Ms. Henry, a little bit more on that.
Mm-hmm.
People tend to, there's carrots and sticks.
Yeah.
You talk more about sticks there. If you don't do this, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
What entices, your enrollment's going up, in your experience, you're in operation, obviously, attaining some status in the profession of education. What causes young people to want to be in school on a consistent basis? And we have a bus for them, we get them there. What causes attendance to go up outside of the stick and the consequence approach?
Definitely, when students are able to experience success, they want to come back to experience that again. One of the initiatives that I refer to, the very important parenting program, we have positive behavior incentives as well as positive attendance incentives. If you've been a part of that truancy program and you've shown up for school for 3 weeks straight, then you may, have open gym or some type of reward in that way. And it's also, we have to work with them on the intrinsic reward. Everything can't be a carrot. And so when we talk about raising their GPA and the improvement in their grades, they really, it's a good feeling for them, because a lot of them think that they haven't experienced any type of success because of something that they did and they can't.
Would you, I appreciate your report. Sarah, you might have other questions, but I'd like a little more input from you. You gave us a tell of some successes, basically. Better facility, culture, attendance going up, we have some achievement gains. But you were one of the first schools where we did a turnaround. Tell us about that process, because we want to know about transitions and operational challenges. How could these successes have been greater in this process, in your humble opinion?
I think that the actual turnaround in this process is very emotional. And I think that it's something that the community, community support makes a world of difference in how the turnaround will start. It definitely impacts enrollment. It definitely impacts the buy-in and the accountability piece and the parent participation and the different partnerships that we are able to leverage. Being that I have been with this project since the beginning, I would say that outside of the facility, really changing the culture of the students who attend school, that is probably the largest challenge for them to understand that this is school. That was probably the biggest aspect. We see students leave the school because it's too much for them to handle. The going to class, being accountable for where you're supposed to be, following rules. And once we're able to change that mindset, not just us, but once that mindset changes, I think that the process will be a little more smooth.
Real quick, about your enrollment, remind me, I think it's in here, but what has the enrollment been?
The current enrollment is 570 students, and that's across grades 7 through 12.
And last year?
Last year, we ended the school year at 549, but started at 619.
And where will you be next fall? Do you project a meeting?
Next fall, I would hope to be at 1,000, but realistically, probably be around the 600 number.
So you'll hold pretty good. So if you had the committee's attention.
Yes, at this point, yes.
So we're here. How could you make these transitions better? What in the law or process or policy would improve and the success rate, accelerate success?
I think it's important for both parties, meaning the TSO and the school district, to sit down at the beginning so that everyone is clear about the roles and responsibilities of each party.
Because this took too long and diverted attention, wasted time, and some missed days.
Yes.
Sarah?
I have just a couple of questions. You referred to the parent meetings. How's your attendance been with that? What percentage of parents?
The parent meetings, they always begin very well. We have about, for each meeting that's monthly, we have about 20 families represented at each meeting, and that's across grades 7 through 12.
And then you referred to the daily professional development. How much of that time is spent kind of mining data versus teaching strategies? And what's kind of the general format for that process?
Each day is dedicated to a specific item. So one day per week is literally dedicated to data, but the data that they're actually looking at will change on a monthly basis. So first, they will always look at the beginning of the month, they will look at the previous month's attendance data. In the middle of the month, they'll look at the behavior data, and at the end of the month, they'll look at the academic data.
And what about the kind of the strategies and techniques then? Is that built into that daily
Yes,
routine as well?
Yes, so typically Thursdays are reserved for actually analyzing data. Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, actually Monday, Tuesday, and Friday are for pedagogical practices, and then Wednesdays are devoted to our student and family support strand, and that's when the guidance counselors, truancy officers, social workers, they can come in and meet with the teaching teams to find out who's in need of services, what are you noticing, these are the students who have been referred for truancy, these are the guidance lessons that are coming up, things of that nature.
And then one more, I promise. You referred to the SIG grants being, I think you said, untimely and cumbersome. What can be done, whether on our end or legislatively, how can we facilitate that process to make sure that available monies are finding their way into the building?
Well, the task, the to-do list on the turnaround, what they have to accomplish is great. And so to have to rewrite the grant every year, that's the cumbersome part. We have goals that we're trying to accomplish and achieve, and to rewrite the grant every single year and not being certain of the amount of funding that you'll receive, or if you will receive the funding, that's the challenge. If the turnaround school is a 3-year SIG grant, 3 or 4-year SIG grant, if that is dedicated to the turnaround operators, I think that would help them in their planning.
So you're looking at three-year runway, a predictable long-term.
Yeah, yes.
How could the legislature craft a better model for defining how the turnaround school operators and the LEAs divide up responsibility for things like facilities, buses, food service?
Well, I think that we started year 0, and that time was used to actually conduct a collaborative quality analysis and complete the survey. But those conversations should take place in year 0, prior to year 1, when the actual TSO is in the building. So that there should be a year 0 where those conversations actually take place, as opposed to year 1 when you're already into the actual work.
Has it been your experience that certain of those items I mentioned, say, make more sense for the TSO to be solely responsible for? Some may make more sense for the LEA to be totally responsible for, like one by one. Let's just say the facility. You're there, your people are, for the most part, operating the building. Does it work better if there's some way to just have all the responsibility for the building with the TSO, as opposed to having this sort of collaborative, ongoing relationship with the LEA?
Mr. Walker, do you mind if I join this conversation?
I don't have a problem at all.
A few members of the board now. Actually, have
This is the Edison hour.
Yeah, thank you very much. I actually do have a few on that. Nicely done.
Thank you.
I don't know say it.
Dynamic duo.
That's right, that's right. Tom Jackson, the President and CEO of Edison Learning. I wanted to get directly to your question, and I want to just dial back the question, which is, what can the legislature do to change and make this process more effective? I think the literature on turnaround shows that you really have to have a collaboration between the district and the turnaround partner and the state. I think that there are roles for each one of those. I think if you look at the most recent report by Mass Insight, I think it fundamentally supports that view, and it also goes with the view that was stated at the outset of beginning with and encouraging local control. Yes, there has to be this sort of carrot stick where you find chronically failing schools and school districts. But I fundamentally believe, after looking at the research and after looking at our experience in turnarounds, that if you don't have that triad, if you don't clearly spell out what is the role of the state, what is the role of the turnaround partner, and what is the role of the district, that you will delay, frustrate, and in fact endanger the turnaround effort. And if you remember, I don't know if you're familiar with the Mass Insight study, but they fundamentally conclude that in the absence of that, you really don't have a successful turnaround. What you really have is a race to the mediocre, not a race to the top.
So are you comfortable with the way the Indiana statute is currently written as it relates to busing, facilities, food service?
In a word, no.
Okay. All right, so assuming that maybe we can recommend something to make it better, what would that be?
What I would recommend is that, and I like what Ms. Henry started with, that the statute should really prescribe what happens in year zero. Year zero should be about an evaluation of the school, because that's making sure that the students are first. But year zero also should be about bringing the parties together to map out, what those roles are going to be. And as I said, there is a role for each side. And being very specific, who's going to be responsible for transportation, and what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of authority, and what does that mean in terms of funding, right? Because simply saying that the dollars will follow the student is really not enough. Because, which dollars follow the student? Is it just the per pupil funding? Or is it also the local tax dollars? If it's the local tax dollars, what is the impact of that on the district? When the entire district is not subject to a turnaround, but simply just one school. It's a really sort of a bowl of spaghetti. When you're pulling on one strand, you're likely to find that it's longer and it's connected to another strand in the bowl. So I think you need all three of those parties at the table. And I think year zero really ought to be about determining what specifically the roles are. Busing, facilities, you mentioned facilities as well. I think when you look at turnaround efforts, you cannot look at them in the vacuum. There's a lot going on in that district, okay? And you can't assume that the district itself, it doesn't have its own efforts going on. And so what you have to do is give that district an opportunity when it's at the table to also be part of, planning for the long run in terms of the district itself. So, districts across the state have challenges around facilities. Gary, to be real, has challenges with respect to facilities, and it has challenges with a shrinking tax base, right? Which is where a lot of those funds are going to. So you have to be very real about, how are you going to effectuate this turnaround with this finite set of dollars and an ever-increasing challenge around such issues as facilities, et cetera. And so I think when the legislature thinks through those kinds of things, it really does begin in that first year, and the plan has to be much more comprehensive in that regard.
This is really interesting. I haven't heard one put it that way, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. Are you suggesting that maybe the statute or the legislature should be silent in terms of defining those responsibilities and let the parties just negotiate that themselves at the outset instead of the state saying, okay, you're going to be responsible for facilities, you're going to be responsible for busing, that nothing, we don't define that at the outset and just let the parties work through a negotiation to decide.
I think the statute should be designed such that the parties have to work it out in that year zero. And maybe the carrot stick is that there's a good default if it isn't resolved by a particular date. But the reality is that high school, that turnaround high school, can't be viewed in the vacuum because there is so much more going on in the district. And so just focusing on the students in the high school without working with the district to think about the students who are going to feed into that high school. What about what's going on with the middle school? if there's a challenge in the high school, more likely than not, it didn't wake up at first day of freshman year of high school. That challenge probably was matriculating through, primary and secondary school for that child's life. So there is a reality to turn around that says to me, into our experience, it says to me that year zero ought not only be about a collaborative quality analysis of the school itself, but it ought to be about a collaboration between the state, the district, and the turnaround partner to emerge with a school improvement plan that is consistent with assisting the district in turning itself around more widely.
Mr. Jackson's comment, some of you were at our first gathering in Indianapolis. I just want to make a point. It is very, very similar. The legislation was mostly about turning around a school, but a school is set in a system and a context and a culture and a process. It's a systemic issue. And that'll be one of our big challenges as we look at the research, as there's more of it than when we started. And I appreciate the way you articulated, actually, Mr. Jackson, because it's probably an open book with maybe some authority of state to finally say, because there's only so much time you can spend in meetings arguing about who's going to fix the steps, because you have students to teach algebra.
Right, at some point you got to say, okay, here's who's going to fix the steps.
And then transportation's more than that, like who's going to transport for athletics. So it gets more to just 7:30 to 4:30.
But I really challenge the board to go one step further, because one of the things that's consistent that I find in underperforming school districts across the country, and I have to say this is anecdotal, it's not research based, is this thing about the lack of funding, the right kind of funding. Often you have school districts that are challenged, particularly in these last economic times, because of deteriorating tax base, property tax base. And so simply to look at the per pupil funding without looking at the deteriorating facilities, without looking at how they're challenged with respect to the finances, I think one of the things that the Mass Insight report gets right is this question of capacity building. Making sure that you're building this capacity at the local level, because that's what's going to be most effective. But capacity is not just about what's happening in the classroom. It is also about the building itself. And no matter what you do to challenge the district to make it better, if in fact they don't have the funds to improve the school building itself, the facade itself, the facility itself, when students walk into that classroom, when students walk into that building, they're not going to feel like that learning environment is in fact conducive to learning. And so I would challenge the board to, as it's looking at all of these different aspects, somebody has to call attention to the fact that the way we fund these underperforming school districts may be as much as the problem as anything else.
Sir?
Just to start, I also am very appreciative of your articulation of the issue, and you make a lot of sense. From more of a historical perspective, however, I thought we had done year zero when we first started, and we called it the observation year. And my recollection was, and correct me if I'm wrong, my recollection was that everyone involved with the process highly advised against having another observation year as we proceed forward. Again, things have changed. We've evolved, and hopefully through this process will continue to evolve. But that was a part of it the first time through, and it was a very negative, in many settings, was a negative.
That's a great question. What does that year zero mean? Because we heard the warm-up act didn't go so well.
Right. Well, I think, let me just offer an opinion as to why the warm-up act was challenged, right? And I think that, Principal Henry alluded to it in her remarks. A lot of times it's not, we can agree upon the objectives, we just may disagree on the tactics, right? And so if you come into my district and you say you're going to take it over, you're going to turn it around, you have already indicted me and let me out as a partner. So year zero is already set up to be fundamentally antagonistic, you know? And so I think that, and this is why, you know, Dr. Pruitt and I, you've heard us talking about changing the conversation, because I think that that's what has to happen here, is that we have to change the conversation from this antagonism to collaboration. And year zero, in my mind, would go a lot better if it was about collaboration and partnership. And we call it a collaborative quality analysis for a reason. Because we recognize it can't be done. That's right.
I think there's agreement, but how?
Well, I do.
Because the intent was, let me make a little language. The intent was during the transition year, everybody would understand what the situation was. Long term, the goal was always to get the school and the children back with the district. Get it turned around, get things hum along, have the district build its capacity, and get back there. So these are your kids, it's your community, make this school. So we said all the right things, but evidently I'm hearing it didn't take.
No, it really didn't. You know, I mean, if we're just real about it, you know, in that year zero, you know, we also tried to have us conversations with the district, and district representatives, but it was very clear, you know, that the district felt indicted by our very presence, you know, and so the question in my mind is really, you know, when you're designing the statutes, when you're designing the policy, I think there has to be, you know, a ramp up here, because you can't go into these situations blind. You've got to figure out what the problem is, and you've got to develop what we call a school improvement plan, what everybody else that probably has a different name for it. But I think at the same time that you're doing that it is incumbent upon the state to turn around partner, get the district to the table, find the right facility, nomenclature, whatever, to get the district to the table, so that the district feels like it is a willing partner in the process and that you can get it. The biggest challenge in talking to the district was not that they didn't want change at Roosevelt. They did want change at Roosevelt. The biggest challenge in that first year was who's going to pay the price of change. When we started talking about maintenance issues and facility issues and all of those in that first year, you know, we had a full room with the board, the superintendent at the time, you know, representatives, concerned representatives, stakeholders, and community. But the real problem was that we had a building, 1929, we had a building that existed from 1929 that needed tremendous repairs. And $150,000 was a drop in the bucket. It was just enough. If you got a chance to tour the school, just enough to get it to a good learning environment. But the infrastructure behind that, the boiler, the swimming pool, you know, all that stuff, you know, who's going to pay for that in a district that has declining property values and therefore declining revenue to pay for capital facilities? And so a statute that says the district will do the same thing for the turnaround academy that it will do for the others is inept in that regard, it's impotent in that regard, because the district doesn't have the money to do anything for the other schools either.
Right, exactly.
Sure.
Obviously, it comes down to a matter of statute and more importantly funding, but my bottom line is that I don't want to delay improvement any further than we have to. And it almost sounds like, I mean, what you're describing in a perfect world, I would love it. It would make sense. It would make change. I almost wonder if we don't need to instead look at how do we have almost a two-tiered process that starts before year 6, where we build that partnership, where we have other sources coming in and building resources and working together with the district. And then if at year 6 we're still not there, things change. But you have players at the table, we're already a part of the process, and hopefully solving the problem before we get to year 6 across the state.
There you go.
Well, this, by the way, came up again. I think it's worth highlighting again in our notes. It's part of a district governance and management issue also. Because you have X amount of resources, how many buildings can you keep operational in a quality level? Where do you get some efficiencies in a hurry? Because in one way, it's easy to keep the operating budget going every year, and the buildings are going down. We when that finally hits you in the face, then it's massive. So, Sarah, I don't want to read. You're saying the intervention starts with the district.
I'd rather see a two-tier where we can make these partnerships, we can give those resources, we can get the right people at the table before we even hit year 6. And then we still have the protection that if we're not there, we look at more invasive or more severe consequences. I don't want to say consequences, but interventions. I'd like to give resources so we don't even get there. That would be an ideal situation.
I do recall, though, we put a lot of time and a lot of resource. Remember, we recruited educators from around the state,
Right.
teachers of the year, principals, universities, some of our professors were involved. Went out to schools and teams, Cambridge and other consultants. Here, you have 4 or 5 years of trouble. Children are learning, and there's attendance problems. So we did, maybe it wasn't the right kind of help. Maybe we need to go back and unpack that and say, maybe it was too much school focus and not enough district focus. I don't know, but even that, quote, help, sometimes I'm from Indianapolis, I'm here to help you, it doesn't go over so well.
But there's also the issue of consistency too, though. If we had a partnership built, and obviously, as we're seeing now in the process of turnaround, things are changing, and people that we want to still be at the table, there are shifts happening, and we have that interruption. But I think there's something to be said for a partnership, knowing they have that buy-in.
This is
This is where we're going if we don't get there, but we already have that buy-in and we're part of that conversation.
I appreciate that. Does that make some sense to the two of our experts actually doing the work?
Yeah, that does make sense. I think the other thing that the research shows on turnarounds is that turnarounds take time. Okay.
How much?
If we call it
How much time?
The average time that you see on a turnaround is somewhere between 3 to 5 years.
That's what the research says. In your experience?
And my experience is it's closer to 5 years. It takes time.
How do you define turnaround?
Well, so I'd rather us get away from the nomenclature turnaround, but turnaround is the word that we're going to use. I think turnaround has to be defined in terms of what we call a 5-strand design, because it's not just going at any one aspect. You've got to look at the learning environment. You've got to look at the family and social issues and other language issues. You've got to look at issues of leadership. And then when you work your way through a 5-strand design, I think a turnaround happens in a context, not in a vacuum. And so if you're looking at turning around a school, a high school particularly, but if you're looking at turning around a high school, in my mind, you have to say to yourself, based on experience, you have to say to yourself, what else is going on in the district? And is the high school more a symptom? And are you dealing with the symptoms rather than dealing with the root? And if you want to really deal with the root, you can't do that without having the district at the table.
And that's one of my big concerns with turnaround right now, isn't looking in the rearview mirror, but looking ahead, what happens at the end of year 5. I mean, you talked about building local capacity. So, I mean, obviously this contract is going to expire. So if Edison just picks up and leaves, has everything that occurred in the last 5 years just leave with you? I mean, right now, under the current model, it seems like it would. So what do we do over these remaining years of the contract to make sure that whatever improvements or gains that have been made with Roosevelt remain here when and if Edison leaves?
I think the answer to that goes to this concept of what's the nature of the collaboration that can be built between the district and the turnaround partner, and if the nature of that collaboration, can occur at year 3, frankly, it can occur from the beginning. You can build the capacity, that local capacity, over the course of the years. What really should happen, really the promise of charter schools, and I can sort of talk about this because we sort of started this effort 23 years ago, right? One of the founding companies that started the charter school movement in the country. And the whole idea was to build these incubators of innovation and education, but not that they would stay within the 4 walls of the school itself, but that all of those innovative practices that were hopefully successful would then be shared with the district at large. So it was never intended that charter schools would be these, little cells of success. It was always intended that charter schools would be part of this larger picture that would help to feed the success and build on the success of the entire district itself.
Mr. Jackson, while you're on that, this is a hot topic, and I wanted to, do you know of situations around the country, because you've said, I'll say it this way, if a car comes off assembly line, doesn't work very well, we don't take the last 3 people that touched it, or 4, and say, you guys are messing up, you're off the line. We have to go back to the beginning. Do you know a situation around the country where when high schools are chronically failing and not achieving, students are suffering, where they take over the high school, the middle school, and the feeder schools that come to it, so that whole pipeline is addressed over a 5-year period to get a running start at it? Because if they come to your door 7th or 9th grade, there's already a lot of education, quote, in the bag, and that's a little late in the game. Do you know a situation where they say that the high school is working very poorly, there must be a systemic, and so we take the whole ladder up over that feeds it?
Yeah, what you're starting to see is a move to that model. You have entire districts now that are starting, for example, to convert to charter. And it's really for that same reason. It's that they're recognizing that they've got,
So they incubate in a ladder incubation as opposed to that 4-wall thing.
That's exactly right.
You have to think preschool through possibly.
You have
So
to.
we're with families and neighborhoods.
Right. The educationalists will tell you, I'm a lawyer by training.
Oh dear.
The educationalists will tell you, that's right. We can change the light bulb if we can. The educationalists will tell you that that period between pre-K and 3rd grade, literacy by 3rd grade, is pivotal, right? Because if you have literacy by 3rd grade, you are more likely to have a high school graduate and more likely to then have either a 2 or 4-year graduate as well. So literacy by 3rd grade.
So you would encourage us to keep looking at, as part of a systemic approach, we have to look at the whole line.
I'd say going downstream. And we talked about charter schools, but charter schools really is one solution. They are public schools, but they're very good examples of traditional public schools, that are good schools, high-performing urban schools. And so, what we advocate are schools that work, right? So if you hear me talking about charter schools, but don't think that I've said that's the only solution. We advocate schools that work for kids, and adults that collaborate for schools that work for kids.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I just want to follow up a little bit because we actually have real schools in our pipeline that are downstream from you now. So, given Roosevelt and, Gary specifically, what type of things should we be looking at to try to correct or get the situation earlier? So by the time it gets to your level, it's better.
Well, I think some of the things that Dr. Brooke and I are suggesting, which is a much more holistic approach to the district itself.
Like what things?
Like for example, I just talked about, pre-K, to 3rd grade, recognizing that we've got to have a program that really addresses literacy by 3rd grade, and say that's the goal, 100% literacy by 3rd grade. What's wrong with a big hairy goal like that? Because if you invest in literacy by 3rd grade, you already know.
We have it at
that
state
goes
level.
there,
It's in our
right?
strategic.
So-
When the
so-
board passed strategic plan, we're on the same page. We just gotta achieve it.
That's right. Okay, so we're going to do that. Then what you do is you say, okay, TSO and district, okay, we really do have a challenge here, all right? You have 90 days. Come back to us with a plan. So a plan that defines literally a lead district partner kind of arrangement, where the district already knows where its challenges are. We as a partner can say, here's what our experiences are and help them to deal with those. And then we can come back to the state and say, state, board, Here's what we as partners would do in this particular district. Here's how we would build capacity so that Roosevelt can be transferred back to the district at the end of the contract. And here's what we would see as things that would be going on afterwards, because there's an after this, right? So here's what we would see going on after this. And where you have, a willing district, then that ought to be the effort. Where you have a district that's not willing, that's where you have to do a little bit of carrot and stick, and say, well, we do think that there's a larger issue here. And if the district and the turnaround partner can't come to a good solution, then, we'll send some experts in and we'll figure out what the solution is. Nobody wants you to figure out the solution for them. Most people will sit down and figure that solution out themselves, But a little bit of carrot and stick, I think, is worth it.
So is the district willing? And I guess we'll ask them.
We're
that.
going to have our
Speak for the district.
real soon. If there's no other further questions, and we can continue, we can call you back. I know you're interested in being part of this, so.
This is very helpful.
Yeah, thank you for your efforts, your courage, and your hard work.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now we have a presentation by Gary Community School Corporation. Same thing, transition challenges, operational challenges. We'd like your recommendations, please.
Good afternoon to everyone, to the State Board. Good afternoon, and to all of those who are here. I believe Tom Jackson went through a lot that I was going to cover, but to go specifically to the assignment today, and that was basically looking at the transition challenges and operational challenges. So I'm not going to go through the State Board interventions because we've done that already, but what do we know from our experiences? It's basically, I believe, what we're talking about. And so as we began this process, just a little historical perspective. I began my tenure in 2012 in July. Tom took over Edison Learning this year. Donna has been principal for about 2 years. And so when we talk about having the right people at the table, one thing, and then I'll go into this, that kind of changed the dial. And the question began to be, what do we need to do to serve these children? And that's basically our goal. And so that's very important, I believe. And so that goes into some of the transition challenges. Number one being there was a lack of clear expectations, as Tom already discussed, that would have decreased if we had those clear expectations, then that would have decreased the confusion as well as the reservation and tension that was created in the community. As Tom just stated, when you talk about turnaround and somebody else coming into your district to turn around your district or take over your district, that makes a community that already has challenges have even more challenges. Because Gary has the highest charter school number, at least had the highest number of charter schools in the United States per capita, I believe. We also dealing with vouchers, we're dealing with low property taxes, and we're dealing with a lot of issues, whether it's not a school district, but it's community. And so the goal here, I believe, will be to how can we serve these children, which ultimately serve the community, the people that live in this community, so that the tax base can increase. So it became somewhat of punitive actions that appeared. As we went through the process after year 0 or in year 1, we found ourselves in court almost all the time. We also found that the newspapers really took a shot at that. So let's publicize that, which made it even more difficult because we really should be focusing on the children. And how did everyone come together to do what is best for those children? So again, the punitive actions that it appeared to be were either resulted in that. Focus on improving the district overall without adding the additional financial burdens that we already have. And that conversation just was had. In terms of, we have a low tax collection, we're dealing with financial issues, but we're also dealing with how do we educate our people in our community, our young people. And so with that, there was not a person, because Gary Community School Corporation was not part of the contract. And at the table to talk about things, then maybe there could be a person directly assigned to the operator and the district to make certain that the goals are identified and met. And of course, include the district in the contract itself. And so that's huge. If you have a contract and the contract is not with the people that it's directly related to, then again, it goes back to number 1, confusion, reservation, as well as tension. And so those are the transition challenges in a summary. And so now if I go to operational challenges, identify and define the maintenance and operational expectation. Who does what when? Also, where's the money coming from? Key part of this, so in as much as there's money attached to that, one way that could be solved is to keep some of the maintenance staff of that district, because when you're dealing with older buildings, they probably know a lot more and they can cut down on some of the learning process, the learning curve. So key part of the district maintenance staff when buildings are older. And identify building defects and determine dollars to assist in improving the historical building needs. Number 3. So that summarizes it for me, because you have to have everybody at the table to talk about primarily that first one, who does what, when, where, and clear expectations, and those dollars to come about. One thing that Tom and I did is we began to talk about how do you change that down, and I believe that goes back to what they were mentioning in year 0. Our expectation was we need to create a relationship within ourselves. If we're going to partner to this and do anything, that everyone knows, especially in education and anywhere else, relationships are huge. If you don't have a relationship built where you can just pick up the phone or text one another, do whatever you need to do to figure out how to resolve it, then you end up in court. So again, going back to what they just talked about sitting at the table and everybody's sitting and really looking at the expectation and also being on one accord. So I believe, as Sarah stated, to have the right people at the table. You know, you can have different people, but sometimes you have to get people with like minds. And I'm not saying everybody doesn't have like minds, but to move in a direction so that those relationships are good and trusting. And that was one thing we said, we have to build a trusting relationship. We have to almost lock arms and do what's best for the children. So do you have any questions for me?
Any questions, Attorney Sarah?
Yeah, I definitely have comments, if not questions. But I think their recommendations are good. One that I really want to highlight, and I know we've talked about this in the past, is that there really is a need, both as you indicate here as a transition challenge and as an operation challenge, to have some type of budget or pot of money appropriated when the state board gets in the turnaround. The issues we've had with the building at Roosevelt during the course of this turnaround have just been ridiculous. And it's really not fair to think that the district can bring the building up to where it needs to be. It really is not fair to believe that Edison signed on to make the kind of capital investment that's required to bring the building to where it should be. So at that point, I've always felt that as a state board, we've had a responsibility, and really the state has a responsibility to say, okay, you did this, you've assumed jurisdiction over this school, that we need to make sure that the kids in that building are being adequately served with the facility. And this is just a perfect example as to what's happened with Roosevelt, that there needs to be a separate pot of money appropriated that can be utilized to make sure that turnaround is effective, at least at the basic public health and safety needs the kids are getting at. That's something I feel very strongly about. And then a lot of the other things that you mentioned on there, as well as what Edison's mentioned, really sort of go away if there's some additional financial support.
Tony, if I can interrupt you for a minute just to go back to Sarah's tier system, because we have issues at other schools, you know, not just Roosevelt. And so then those students that come to Roosevelt or the community, so is Roosevelt a gifted child, because it almost appears that this is a ward of the state now. So it begins to divide, the community begins to divide the children. Well, I'm gonna go over here and I get clean lockers, I get new lockers, I get a new atmosphere. We know that's directly related to education in terms of the correlates. So we have other schools also, so we did that, what you were talking about a minute ago, looking at that to make certain that the culture and the climate in buildings are able to make the academic improvements that will benefit the students. Because again, Roosevelt has those issues, but we have other buildings in the community in terms of capital projects because of the lack of dollars or whatever it may be with where we are that need improvement.
And that's why I also believe there has to be a lot of forethought given before, you know, there's any type of vote to take over or turn around the school as to whether or not the district really needs those seats, whether or not, you know, the added capacity is needed. There was an argument that could have been made that Roosevelt could have been closed, that, you know, the district really did not need the additional school at the time it was taken over. Now, I agree with Dan that that should ultimately, you know, always try to be a local decision, like you all made with Blue Wallace this year. But we have to consider these economic realities prior to just jumping in. And given the, you know, work that was needed on this particular building, I think it could have gone either way. But, you know, I think it's a decision that has to be made at the local level, and I commend you and your board for making that decision as relates to Blue Wallace, which is now, you know, in the pipeline for a vote. But arguably, you know, if the seats aren't needed, then the school shouldn't be taken over.
I would also like to piggyback a little bit off of what Tom stated too, in a different way in terms of whomever those partners are. If we're looking at the holistic part and the district part, what gaps can they fill? You know, Edison Learning has a very good e-learning. We want to make certain that we increase the graduation rate. So those are processes that can be used within the district overall as well. So I just want to state that that's really a key also.
Sir. Dr. Pruitt, thank you for your presentation. I have a couple, I don't know if they're comments or questions, but I'd be interested to have your, part of this, we have a district with aging buildings. Students have vouchers and charters, and there's a decreasing population. So when do boards have to make timely, tough decisions so you don't get in? Because there's a way in which you show me the incentives, we can predict the behavior. So it might be best to wait around, have the state take over your school, fix it all up, you'll get it back 5 years later. We won't take care of it, we'll just take care of it. I mean, so we can't really have a pot of money sitting there and say, well, this is available if you get taken. And I don't know what, by the way, one thing, is there better language? I like your recommendations on it. We've used takeover, turnaround, a few other things, but what does a district, you're fairly new here, so you could kind of look back. Has district over the history not been willing to face some realities? What extent is there not enough money, and what extent have we avoided, which is easy to do, by the way, tough decisions as populations were decreasing and there wasn't enough tax base or students to support the size of buildings?
Yeah, and I believe
Because one's money and one's management and leadership.
Right, and I believe you do have to look at the historicals on that, because if you look at when it all happened, I believe it was 2008, 2009. In 2008, I believe the tax collection was about 91 or 92%. That next year it went down to 97, then it went down to 41, and it stayed constant that whole time. In that time, I believe some new buildings were built, some buses were purchased, et cetera, but people may not have realized that that was going to happen, in addition to the complexity of the way in which schools are funded occur too. So there's so many dynamics that were working in that time, and so you would just have to look at it and see. Now, we could argue, well, how come you didn't do this, or how come you didn't do that at that time? But I would propose that we are here now, and we have children that we have to educate right now, and we have buildings that are old, and we have funding that we need. And so we can go back and look at that just so we have a historical perspective of it, but the charge is now, because this is what is going on right now.
Did you estimate you have overcapacity in what percentage? Do you have 50% too much building for the number of students you serve? 10% too much? 80% too much? Do you have a beat on that?
Well, we just concluded closing 5 buildings. That was a substantial number of buildings to close. We also have decreased the number of employees by about 800 in the past 2 years. So, and we are moving into the process of looking at all of our collective bargaining agreements. So our collective bargaining agreement this year goes out. We also have the teacher evaluation model. And so we also need to look at our agreements with our other unions.
So you're doing all the challenging big issues with the big.
Right, because you have short-term and long-term. So short-term now, but some of these short-term things the monies may not be realized till it moves a little bit down the line. So what do you do to stop that ball from keep rolling down the hill?
Well, Dr. Pruitt, thank you for being a courageous leader. I would also, we talked a little bit about language. There's some issues of language. You say turnaround, takeover, chronically failing. What language would you assign when we see groups of students in schools that aren't working very well for them by almost any metric? How would we label that to the vernacular, or what kind of language would you all recommend?
Maybe something with the word collaborative and partnership. Some kind of way at least that's embedded in there in order to form systemic change for academic improvement. So I don't know what that name would be, but something that embeds that.
Any other questions or comments from Dr. Roy?
Yeah, I have a comment. I read your joint proposal, and there's some things very interesting in there. Clearly, I think details would need to be sort of clarified, but I support the idea of a broader collaboration of Edison throughout the Heritage School.
Thank you for your willingness and all the hard work you're doing. We've noticed this last month that there is this new, hey, what are we doing for the young people? Where it seemed before we were in court and putting a lot of energy and time and money, precious money, and effort, so it's obvious your leadership's taking hold. And just for this board member, I want to thank you. We've noticed a big difference in her staff. So.
Thank you. And thank you for the driving down, so we didn't have to drive that.
Yeah, let me. I have a committee member that wants a 5-minute recess. I won't go into why.
I'll take a picture.
I just want you to observe his picture, and then and I don't know. I don't want to put you on the spot, but Senator Rogers, you've been so involved. Maybe come back. Would you offer commentary and ideas about it when we come back from our break?
All right.
Because we don't want Tony here to revolt. Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back. Thank you.
Okay. Sir?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Great job.
Thank you. So you're saying they want to know there's enough skill over there to be able to
Dr. Ridley was last year. He was right there. And I'll take you.
Mr. Walker, just a second, Senator. Sometimes it's like a classroom. You give them an answer, they take a while. Mr. Walker. Mr. Walker's in his place, so now we can begin. If we could have your attention, Senator Rogers, you'd be interested in your insights, observations, any suggestions or questions you might have.
Well, let me be brief and just admit I was over there raising my hand furiously. And there was steam coming out of both my ears and my mouth in terms of some input I wanted to make into this process. But I eventually said to myself, early in life, just stay in your lane. So I'm staying in my lane.
This is your area. You have a big lane.
No. And I have all the answers over there. I want you to know that. I was one of the 50 that was in favor of Public Law 221 that you alluded to earlier. And the reason that went so well, I've always said, is because there was collaboration there. I mean, those of us that were involved in that, we met in the mornings before session started, and we had every stakeholder at the table. We had a parent, we had a PTA, we had the Chamber of Commerce, we had the unions, we had principals and teachers, and we met and hammered out Public Law 221. Now, in many instances, it kind of morphed into directions in which we had not intended. But I think the initial acceptance of the charge of the legislature in terms of education reform and what happens if you don't reform, I think we made a good start in Public Law 221. I also happen to have been involved with the turnaround, and I don't shy away from the term turnaround. And there was a very close working relationship between the then Department of Education and the Gary Community School Corporation, and I was involved in some of those meetings too. But I think that what was said by the superintendent and also by Edison Learning in terms of a lot of the problems that we had with Roosevelt had to do with things that should have been worked out before the actual learning took place. And I was wondering, as you were talking, you talked about the first year being the year in which and that it was supposed to be that way, in which all these problems worked out. I was wondering whether or not prior to your decision for somebody to actually be the turnaround operator, whether or not you're the turnaround operator would depend upon how you were able to work out the agreement, and that designation would not be made until after or came forward with the best formula for that. So that was just kind of what I was thinking and what I was going to ask whether or not that might be the case. But I think Edison Learning and the new person from Edison Learning and our superintendent are going the way that I've always thought, and I think many of us in the legislature have always thought, that education is really about cooperation as opposed to competition. And anytime you can get people to cooperate, then I think you've done what's best for children. And I would like to congratulate the State Board of Education for doing what you're doing. I've said to the legislature all along as we pass bills, we need to, I've called for moratoriums to stop now and see what we have done and see how it is actually impacting education. We haven't stopped to do that. So you've taken and turned around schools which you have responsibility for, and you're stopping to kind of assess what's going on there. And I think that that will go well for turnaround schools, and I think it may be able to serve as a model for what other education reforms that we have put into operation here in Indiana. So I'd like to thank you for that, and I just look forward to Roosevelt and School Corporation working together. I admit I'm a graduate of Gary Roosevelt, and I'm threatening Tony Bennett to lie down in front of the first demolition vehicle if you try to close Roosevelt School, right?
Tony Walker's suggestion was
right, yeah. When you said that, did you graduate from Roosevelt?
No.
The CAC now?
Yeah.
And the same way with Dr. Smith, he graduated from Frable, okay? So I was the one that made certain that Roosevelt School, because it's more than a school. I mean, it's an integral part of this community, and the reason why it was built and how people look up to it now. I mean, I just think that it's so important to this community, not only as an education institution, but also as something there that has been able to stand over time. And I'm just very pleased with what you're doing there at Roosevelt. I mean, that visit this morning, I think those of us that were participating in it, I think it was well worth having and doing. And so I'd like to thank you for that. But anyway, I didn't really want to talk too much longer than that. But I have relieved some frustrations that I had to say something, But thank you so much for allowing me to talk, and good luck on what you're trying to get done. And when you do get to the point where you've got some recommendations for the legislature, make sure you call us in, especially the ranking and the ranking minority members and the chairman of the Senate Education Committee. So let's kind of sit in and kind of set up that process, so that when we go back to the legislature, whichever decision you come to, that we can have the same kind of totals that we did with Public Law 221, okay? And I don't know who that one person was in the House that didn't vote for. I need to
We're going to look that up.
Let's look that up and see what happened to that person. I'm sure he's no longer there. Thank you.
I think he's buried under the front steps of You don't mess with Senator Rogers. He gets smacked down a little bit here. I would say things were in your area, Senator. I've been involved in educational issues in Indiana for probably 23 years. And even folks on various issues that might disagree with Senator Rogers, just for folks in this area, I've never heard everybody respects you. They always know at the end of the day, Senator Rogers is about the child and do the right thing, might have a different approach. And people could be even opposing your approach or you theirs, but they always respect Senator Rogers. That's been very consistent, so I appreciate your service. Okay, we are looking at policy resource allocation improvements, update on national consultant. Can we kind of talk about that?
Sure, yeah, I think we kind of subsumed that agenda item in the comments that were made.
Pretty well.
Unless you have other things you want to add.
Well, I would like to hear what kind of expertise because I don't want to relearn all the lessons that I learned around the country. I'd like to kind of let them share it in advance and incorporate it in this discussion with the governor's office and legislature about how we move forward.
Great. Well, and if this were easy, we wouldn't be doing this work in the first place. So the more folks who can help us think about it, the better. So under the authority of the resolution adopted by the board, we did ask some groups to submit proposals to us and have selected public impact who's a national expert in school turnarounds, to analyze the information, what's occurred in all the schools, both the turnaround, school operator, and lead partner model, come in and speak to the committee at our next few meetings and interview all the players involved, the corporations, the turnaround operators, lead partners, Department of Education, and the mayor's office, everyone who's played a role, and come up with some recommendations to help us to write this report. And they're also going to take a look at more recent national best practices data, how have other states approached this type of work. We've seen that Mass Insight report. We'll be hearing from Mass Insight at our October 22nd meeting in Evansville, since they work with actually the entire Evansville district, so that we're seeing that model in practice here in Indiana. So we look forward to them engaging with you at our next meeting. They'll start to be attending. And the scope of the work that we asked them to do, I just went through this, but they're going to analyze the progress we've made as a state, develop lessons learned today, and we've already started to gather that for these meetings that we've had. They are going to then draft recommendations and collaborate with you as the committee to come up with your final recommendations to the full board, and they'll come and present to the full board. Now, they did say that this was an ambitious scope of work, and they said they might want to add an extra November meeting and then have that come before the board in early December. So I just want to let you know about that. Any questions about that?
Well, we're so excited here, there might be another meeting. We don't do enough of this. Thank you. Any questions? But I appreciate, I mean, I have some knowledge of this firm and their work, so I think it could be a great help to us as we prepare that. So, any progress update from the IPS lead partners discussion? Or?
Yes, just to very briefly inform you that Bob Guffin has been working with Teresa Brown at the Department of Education. The department is, has gone back to the roster of folks who responded to the RFP a year ago and asked 3 of them to submit revised scopes of work for IPS to replace TMTP. And that should be coming to the board, we think, either at your next committee meeting in October or the October 15th 14th.
And do those prospects seem interested?
We believe so. I think there's still some work to do there.
Just for, were we looking at lead partner arrangements in IPS that move TMPT project to happen, so it wasn't working well. The collaboration, the relationship. So any other comment or question about that?
I do have a question.
Good.
Just for clarification, is TNTP completely out at this point, or are they staying until they have a replacement?
The contract was never executed, so I don't think the work had actually commenced.
So there's currently no one there.
Any other, the board members, do you want to comment, or we've had 2 meetings, we've done a good bit of reading, we've all traveled this, where we want to go, I guess we'll latch on to turnaround so we come with something better process, because we were on the board together when we looked at the original consultant, Cambridge, remember their work, and went back out to districts, and I think most of us visited almost every school we eventually intervened in. Actually spent time there and talked to the parents and all before we did it. So, any comments by board members, observations, point, or questions? Or this last meeting in Evansville, do you have anything you'd like us to do differently?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Dan and Sarah for coming to Northwest Indiana for me. That's a welcome pleasure. We should have a State Board of Education meeting up here as well, so. So they can stop calling me the permanent calling.
Tell me calls in sometimes. No, it's our pleasure to have this speak for you.
And I do want to reiterate also I appreciate the tour this morning, and it was great to be in the building and to feel that changing climate and the community within that building. So thank you for having us.
Having been a principal in a past life when I was much younger, it is a young person's sport. Some appreciation for the challenge of that, and it's obvious from all the reports, what we're hearing, you have an example of how to do things, so we're blessed to have you up there.
I just want to clarify, since our next meeting is in Indianapolis, that should be Evansville, right?
No, we added a meeting in Indianapolis just to focus on Charter Schools USA, Then 3 schools, they submitted a petition of relief, and then Arlington. Now, do we want to have the lessons, preliminary lessons for the conversation?
I'm fine with it, but I think we can probably delay it because of some of the consultant, and we'll be looking at the notes. I'll just wrap up in terms of lesson learned, and we'll talk about our next meeting. Something's been very clear as this has unfolded before our very eyes, and we tried to do this in the interest of children, that their systems, culture, processes, communities, our strategic plan that the board just passed calls for excellence in student achievement for every student, not just certain students. It talks about engagement in the community, and it talks about capacity, especially in terms of professionals, starting with school leaders, of course, teachers, and others. And it's interesting, the issues we deal here, they're more impactful because they were alarmingly low achievement levels. That is always the case. And I appreciate our 3 goals in our strategic plan. And if we, as a state governor, through every educator, through every community and every parent, the community of parents, business owners, everybody, gathering, putting their hands and hearts and efforts around schools. It's our future, economically, socially, and culturally. Social justice, economic justice, everything else goes with education now. And we can't leave any children behind. You can't have, well, most of our schools are good. Every school has to work. And so I've been taken with, as this unfolded in our strategic plan, how it kind of comes together quite well. We'll get the expertise together. If I take one thing from this meeting, other than it's a system and a larger process, is that you have to partnership and collaborate on this. And we have to have the incentives there where all parties want to do that from day one, not 1 or 2 years after wasting law. No offense to the lawyers here. No, without wasting legal fees and time. We should be focused on education. So, great community, great comments. And Sarah, if you have any other, I think we'll adjourn the meeting unless you object, because you're the last board member present.
Motion and second.
Motion and second. That's a unanimous and Sarah speaks. Thanks, staff, for organizing this. You're so welcoming. We'll try to come back soon. Thank you for your work.